All right, last part of this mini series, and in this part, I will be talking about how I just made this foam in 3D code and just thoughts about it. So essentially, this foam comes from a chemical reaction that happens if you stick on this glue. It's like blows out, and you can then stick it to any other surface, so it's a concrete or stone or tree, and have this kind of bomb attached to some other part of the surface. And if you're interested how I textured the part and how I designed everything, just check my previous videos on my channel. It's all there. And let's just get started with some abstract form modeling. All right. So I'll start. I'll use a snake toothpaste tool to start with this foam. Essentially, just getting a whole bunch of blobbiness, blobby shapes, and really, it took quite a bit of time to make this. I and I'll talk about that, stuff that you can avoid really. Just cutting all the underneath stuff. So just shaping this. I'm gonna blobbiness. Right. So I just changed this voxels to surface, and here I did it so I can use the inflate tool to start inflating stuff. And I wanted to have this kind of bulging bubbles structure, and adding some surface details that I can use as a base for the inflate tool. So when you bulge it like that, you get fairly realistic bubbles, and when you turn them back to voxels, this all intersection geometry becomes a bit more real. And I just turn it back to voxels, and I'm just trying different materials and looking how it looks. So I mean, even at this stage, it's already usable as it is. You don't even need to carry on. So then I use the like stencil, this default stencil of a leaf, so to create a whole bunch of cracks in the mesh. I was thinking it being like polyurethane foam or just any kind of gum and resin that when it gets thick, it becomes starts to crack a little bit, which many of them do. So just duplicated a layer that doesn't have any cracks that go through the whole thing, and then combine both meshes. So I don't have this extreme cracks. And then I feel stuff here and there, so I don't have cracks that go all over the thing. Also, did those cracks having a radial symmetry on, so probably from three sides, I projected and created a whole bunch of cracks from three sides. That helps. And then I'm just decided, okay, well, one thing I don't like about this particular structure and how it looks is that most of those bubbles, they are kind of same in their size and their spread. So I wanted to break up this form a little bit and then use the same inflate tool at the surface mode and inflate, get them back to voxels, fix anything that I need, and go back to surface. So jump in and out all the time. Is it an inflate? I mean, obviously, when you inflate it in the surface mode, you get a whole bunch of artifacts and intersection mesh. It's pretty ugly, but it looks good, looks fine when you jump from inflated mesh to a voxel, right? So voxels, they fix everything. And then you can jump from the fixed voxel mesh back to the surface and do the texturing. So kind of maintain all those, bubbles. but I can get a solid mesh out of it. And just an experiment, I contracted the top mesh from the bottom mesh. I looked at how it looks, and I decided that I don't need to do that. The skull mass look way too big, so I'll be shrinking it down a few times just by regular scale tool. Right, just doing a bunch of holes. So essentially, I'm doing these holes um, to, to allow me to inflate them later when I go back to surface mode. And I'm drawing using Vox clay tool to create a few drops outside. And I cut the bottom to make those drops less round. Okay, just made a whole bunch of surface, and I decreased the size of the mesh, resolution of the mesh. And I'm using this dissolve, which just projected from the top and applied smoothing a few times, and then go back to inflate. So there's a lot of experimentations. I just try different tools how and look and check how they look. Like, what if I smooth the whole bunch of those bulges and then again do the inflate tool and send them back to voxels? Do that a few times and see how it goes. And I decided that I need to cut this whole thing through again because I like the overall shape, but I found that I've lost so much, um, you know, randomness of those cracks. So I needed to recreate those cracks again using the radial symmetry and that particular leaf stencil. And then I'm just unhiding with the brush different parts of the mesh. It really helps greatly that you can turn on realistic light inside 3D code and see how it looks more or less correct with proper materials and all that. And while I'll texture high poly stuff here, well, I will texture this form later, and I already textured this whole asset. It's a high poly mesh. You can actually bake it down to a low poly, no brainer. I'll try to make a separate video about it. Stay tuned for it. Uh, I've essentially used smooth a couple times. So I duplicated the layer and hid everything. Then I scaled it down a little bit, and I will combine it with the bottom layer, so the cracks they don't go too deep. Right, and this is how it looks in more or less branded state, which again really helps to have that feature. Okay, and going back to surface mode, inflated, and a whole bunch of cracks to get a different look for it, like inflated look. Bulging out look. I wouldn't say I'm like 100% happy about it. I mean, in the end, it looked all right. Maybe if I spent a bit more time and experimented even more, I would have done a really good like resin mesh. I'm just trying different materials, and I've tried my old backup copies of the resin. Just constantly compare with what I ended up with, and I decided that it's good enough to paint. So I'll be using the dot material just to go around and just paint it. If I imagining that it's been like stick to a stone in the forest for a little while, and now we have a lot of dirt on that resin accumulated over a few rains, and stones. S- yeah. I really like this alpha, like a correct alpha that allows you to paint this stuff. And I spent a lot of time just trying new materials, creating new. I was reusing the same polymer material and changing the color of it. Maybe we've done like 5 or 6 of those, maybe even like 10. And I think the most realistic was when I used something like orange, because then you think about this being a polyurethane. I think that's hopefully I pronounced it right. Foam. But then, I was thinking from a practical standpoint that if it's a military device and it wouldn't be that bright orange, you wouldn't really use the orange color. It would be way too noticeable, like this. I kind of like that glossy look. It looks more like tar, some kind of resin, black resin, but it's just way too shiny. And like 3D code is not good enough to render it properly, in my opinion. S- I'm just adding different color accents like this. Essentially, it's well, obviously overblown. It's red, but I will just tone it down in a second. So paint all the cracks, then I will use a smooth brush. Yeah, smoothing it out, and then I will just go and tone it down by a lot, by like tone it down to 20%. So it just helps to break the surface. And I've been using red color because essentially it comes from this red gum, So I wanted to retain some of that color continuity. I really couldn't pick a color for this resin because I was just cycling through so many. Uh, every color just gives it a different look and different feeling. Every different material. And this is actually the cool thing about high poly texturing, that you can't cycle the materials that easy if you have a low poly material already baked. So I made this whole bit even smaller than it was. And I think that this kind of red brown material became my go-to color. So now I want to paint dirt on both, like the modules, black modules, and the gum piece. So if so, it would look like they're all together, like this. So combine it all together. So I picked a smart material, a cartoony material, which is just gray color, which is good enough. It doesn't use any curvature or ambient occlusion maps, so that was what I was trying to achieve. And doing render inside render room and trying different maps and checking how it looks. I do like the feeling when you deal with this stuff, like when they paint it in 3D code. It looks quite disgusting, honestly. It looks like it's a real dirty piece of prop. You don't really want to touch, you really want to wash it. And that's great, it's great that it gets that feeling of a real game prop. Again, cycling some materials, whole bunch of them, the metal materials, just trying everything really, and then rendering that, and that didn't look any good. So I just went back to the polymer type materials, and really, I really like this blue, for example. This looks interesting enough for me. Then I was also cycling some materials for the cap for the top detonator, and again, how cool is that? You can just on the fly change it, change it. And ended up that I like this kind of brighter blue, and I changed everything to be this brighter blue. And that's really about it. So thank you guys for watching, and check my previous videos for any extra materials, and check my new videos, upcoming videos. See you next time.